Hello everyone. So in this lecture, we're going to talk, or this is kind of like a teaser about endorphins and opioids. Now we could go more in detail, but I'm just going to give a kind of overview. So endorphins fall under this category of neuropeptides over here, and there's a lot of them, but we're just going to focus on endorphins in this lecture. So neuropeptides, so neuro meaning like nerve, and peptides, so one of those very small protein chain. Now, these neuropeptides, there's a whole bunch of them. For my class, do you need to know all of this? I'm just showing you that there's a whole bunch of them, and they have a large variety of effects, and you find them in a large variety of areas, especially like in the endocrine system as well. But this also includes opioid peptides. And what are these? Well, opioid peptides, endorphins are a type of opioid peptides, but there's other types as well. So there are other opioids, but in this lecture, we're going to focus on the endorphins. Now, the endorphins and opioids, so this is why, what receptors do they target? They target opioid receptors, as endorphins are part of an opioid neuropeptide. So endorphins are a class of what we call endogenous or opioid peptides and endogenous. So what does endogenous mean? Maybe we covered this before, but to clarify things, endogenous means anything your body naturally makes. So this is your body's natural opioids. So they're not like opioids like from opium. This comes from your own body. Your body makes these peptides all the time, and they target these opioid receptors. So advanced classes, or if you're going to nursing, medicine, or pharmacology, you gotta know these eventually. But there are three types, but just they're all collectively called opioid receptors. All these endorphins, they can target these and activate these opioid receptor proteins. Again, differences, I'm just showing you that there are three types. For my class, just know that there's opioid receptors. Now, why are they important? Well, and why might opioids be given in the clinical context? Well, things that opioids are involved in pain. So there's nociceptor. We'll talk more about this in the future lecture, but in general, nociceptor is a neuron that carries signals of pain. So say you prick your finger, your nociceptors get kicked in. For that detect that will be activated. Or you touch something hot, nociceptors are activated. You eat or you like, what's it? Maybe you swallow something spicy, nociceptors are activated as well. Either way, so nociceptors, what turns them on? So there's something called substance P, and which is yet another neuropeptide, not the same as the opioids. But what you have is like if you have substance P, it binds to these substance P receptors on nociceptor neurons. It causes pain. So substance P causes pain. Now, what do opioids do? So opioids provide pain relief. And what they do is they block the release of substance P. So if you don't have substance P in this synapse, you don't get pain signals. So here's the key right here. So endorphins are a type of opioid. So endorphins will bind to these opioid receptors over here, and this blocks. This tells this neuron right here, or this axon terminal, not to release substance P. So if you don't release substance P, you don't get pain signals. So this is how it. So opioids do not block the nociceptor directly. It just prevents that substance P from being released. So this is also opioids can also reduce stress. Not It doesn't just pump the brakes on substance P and hold it back. That it also inhibits norepinephrine release. And now, if you watched a norepinephrine lecture, you know that's the kind of like fight or flight system kicking in, and you have an increased alertness and you have an increased like arousal. So this is, instead of like a lot increasing your alertness, it's going to block that signal. So it's going to decrease alertness and make things more calm down. So this is why it's kind of like more of a lowering effect, not really stimulatory. But the thing is that it increases dopamine release. So this is why opioids make some people feel good, because they're getting more of that feel good neurotransmitter. But unfortunately, remember that dopamine, if you watch that lecture, is also potentially addictive. And that's why opioids are also potentially addictive, because they affect dopamine. Now, exogenous. So exogenous is the exact opposite of endogenous. So exogenous opioids, this is a poppy, an opium plant. And this is where they first discovered these opioids, and that's why they're called opioids, because this is the first way, the first source of these like things that act like opioids were discovered. So exogenous means outside the body. You don't have these plants growing in your body, so yeah, any chemicals that from this plant is exogenous. So opium is so it's a recreational drug, but where it was originally derived from is from these little seed pods right there. So it's actually a dried latex, a kind of sap they got from that, and it contains many compounds, including morphine, codeine, and similar compounds that all tickle that same opioid receptors that our natural endorphins do. There's also synthetic opioids, and one of the first ones was like heroin and fentanyl. And fentanyl, if you heard that in the news, that also targets those receptors. That's way more powerful than just your natural ones and even like previous type of synthetic opioids. So heroin is an old one. It's actually synthesized in 1876, and it was trademarked. Yeah, so what's it like? Opioids and heroin for coughs. I mean that they didn't realize how addictive it was, but they're saying like, okay, since it kind of helps with pain relief, it kind of helps like it also makes people feel better. Maybe that's great. And it was the name comes from like German and Greek are heroic strong, so it makes people feel good. But it's like the back then they thought it was less addictive morphine cough syrup substitute, but then yeah. So here's like syrup, Bayer syrup with heroin. I mean, they were giving heroin to kids, so that's what. And then before they found out, like, hey, there's a dark side to this, and heroin, there's a reason why it's illegal. Now, things that sometimes, unfortunately, like these opioids sometimes find their way outside of the clinical use because fentanyl is a clinical use opioid, but unfortunately, sometimes like people find ways to procure them and they're overdosing on this stuff. So, things that mute opioid receptors, what do they cause when you have them stimulated with some sort of opioid uh, drug that has opioid activity? It's going to, well, one thing in even things like morphine and just like common other opioid drugs used in the clinic, especially in the hospital. That's why patients on these pain relievers often get constipated. It slows down your digestive tract, and if you slow down the digestive tract, you also slow down all the feces and poop that's in the digestive tract. So that's why constipation is a very common side effect for that. It's also going to decrease respiratory rate because again, it's going to pull back on norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is fight or flight. That increases your respiratory rate. It's going to increase your breathing. If you pull back on that, that's going to slow down your breathing and heart rate. So remember that norepinephrine is fight or flight, but opioids push it the other way. You're going to not have as much of that stimulation. So instead of having an increased heart rate, it's going to lower heart rate. Now, the other thing is like this is why there's an opioid epidemic because of the addictive properties of it. I mean, and it's not just like dopamine is a big part of it, but because again, opioids increase dopamine, but they also like yeah, affect the other neurotransmitters as well. That's why it's also have addictions as well for that. But things that if someone takes too much of this opioids, what happens? Too much, their heart rate could slow down where their heart can't pump enough blood to where it needs to be, or they could slow down so much that they could stop breathing altogether. So that's why this like is a very bad epidemic and it's a deadly epidemic. So that's why naloxone, Narcan, what it does is that it can rescue someone's life by so naloxone is going to kick off those opioids from the receptors. So because why? If this there you have so many of these receptors with something like heroin or fentanyl, that's causing someone to have cardiac arrest where it's things heart stops or their lungs stop breathing or they just stop breathing altogether. You want to restore the function. You want to like release the brakes so that they can start breathing and you can normally and their heart can return to a normal rate. So that's why naloxone is literally a life-saving drug because it prevents people from crashing that way from an opioid overdose. Now, what's a nice way and legal way and safer way of getting an opioid high? So there's exercise induced euphoria or nickname runner's high. So what's a runner's high? It's not running while high, but it's referring to that feeling when some people get when they run enough, then they find out they feel good. I mean, I don't think I've ever run enough to get that high, but the thing is that running reduces anxiety because this kind of physical activity releases endorphins and any sort of exercise. So maybe if I, maybe well, I'm probably like I don't know if you can like lift a lot, and or maybe some people when they lift they get these endorphin release if they lift long enough. But either way, this is why exercise feels good because it releases endorphins, and endorphins they increase dopamine. So this is a nice natural way of your body getting good feelings and good mood boosting neurotransmitters just from your natural body, your response to exercise. So, but the thing is that they're trying to say, okay, what causes the runner highs? The endorphins were the first thing they looked at, and they saw maybe endorphins alone can't explain it. So they say, oh yeah, maybe this euphoria is also involves not just like endorphins, but also cannabinoid receptors. And you also have cannabinoid receptors, so maybe there is something to this picture. But we'll save that for another lecture. So to wrap up, so we talk about endorphins, more specific, or maybe neuropeptide opioids, but more specifically, endorphins are natural opioids and target that we produce all the time, and these and the effects of opioid receptor activity on just in general on the body, but also why that it could also be potentially deadly if someone takes too much of these exogenous opioids as well.